Hi guys, this is Lauren with Lauren Watkins Art, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Bruynzeel Soft Pastels. This is the set of 48, and at the moment, this is their complete set. They come in sets of 12, 24, and 48, and they come packaged like this where you get a sleeve on the outside that shows you a picture of them. And then on the back, it gives you a list of what colors are inside that package, and it shows you the manufacturing information. These are made by Royal Talens. When you slide that sleeve off, you can see that this is using a drawer-style packaging system. And this style of packaging kept the pencils really nice and secure. I really liked how there was foam around each pencil so they didn't shift around or clang together, which prevents the colored core from breaking during travel and shipment. So I didn't have any issues with broken cores or issues with my pencils not sharpening right because the colored inside was broken. The only other pencils that I've had that have been packaged this securely are my Caran d'Ache pastel pencils, and they have a similar packaging style where they have foam around each individual pencil to just keep them nice and safe. These pencils are made by Royal Talens, like I mentioned earlier, and these are really well-made pencils. The set of 48 is a very nicely balanced set in terms of color and value, because all too often I see a disproportionate amount of yellows compared to other colors, especially in these smaller sets. You'll have like twice as many yellows as you do reds, blues, purples. Sometimes it can get really, really unbalanced. But this one was quite balanced, where you had a good selection of each color, and in each color family you had light and darker values and warm and cool versions of each color. So it's quite well balanced, and then it had vibrant colors and neutrals to choose from. So for a limited set that is only 48 colors to choose from, this is a very useful hardworking set where you can get a lot of mileage out of this and create a lot of beautiful artwork. And I know it sounds a little bit crazy to say 48 is a limited palette, because if you bought 48 tubes of watercolor or oil paints, you could mix so many colors, and that's an insane amount of paints to choose from. But when you're working with a dry medium like pastel pencils or colored pencils or soft pastels, where you have to do your mixing on your surface, like your paper or your sanded paper, whatever it is you're working on, instead of on a palette, you are a lot more limited with how much mixing you can do. And so you tend to need more colors. For today's demo, I'm going to be painting Mesa Arch, which is an arch found in Canyonlands National Park here in Utah, and it's one of my favorite arches to go hike to. The paper I'm going to be working on is Canson Mi-teintes paper, which is a cotton-based paper, and this is in the Canson Mi-teintes sketchbook. So this is a sketchbook that they made that has glassing in between each sheet of paper to protect your artwork when your sketchbook is closed. It's really similar to the soft pastel sketchbooks that I've been making for quite a few years, though I typically make mine with sanded paper. And while I love working on sanded type papers, whether it's one that's coated with cellulose like a pastel matte paper, or one that's more like a traditional sanded paper like the UArt paper, I don't love using them for my final reviews because they are so forgiving that they can disguise a lot of issues that you might have with the pastel themselves. And I find that working on a more traditional pastel surface like this Canson Mi-teintes one, it's really going to show you if there's any imperfections or if the pastels are too hard or inconsistencies on texture with the pastels better than the sanded surfaces. So let's talk a little bit more about these pastel pencils. Their core is a 3.8 millimeter, and this is the same size as the Pit Pastels from Faber-Castell. The hard to softness range of pastel pencils is quite narrow, meaning there's not as much of a difference between the hardest soft pastel pencil and the softest pastel pencil as there is with your traditional soft pastels, where a new pastel or a Rembrandt pastel are very different and behave very differently compared to your Schmincke soft pastels, where there's a huge spectrum in between and how they all behave. With the pastel pencils, it's a lot narrower and it's just more of a nuanced experience. According to Dakota Pastels, these rank between the Caran d'Ache and the Stabilo pencils. And so these ones are the second softest out of the range of professional soft pastels that they carry. And I could really tell that these ones were quite soft just because of how easily they laid down color, even on a non-sanded surface, how buttery smooth they felt in my hand as I was applying the color, and then how easily they blended out. I could use all different kinds of blending tools with these, whether it is a soft tool like you see here, where I have like the sponge on the palette knife, or in other videos and in other paintings where I was using more of the rubber shapers. These blend out really, really nicely and are really a joy to use. And while I'm only demonstrating dry blending techniques in this demo, I tested these pastels out by using rubbing alcohol to blend them out, layering them over inks and like multimedia uses. I tested them out on different kinds of paper, and I even did a painting where I didn't blend these pastels at all, which is quite difficult, especially with a pastel pencil. So I did an entire drawing where I just layered these pastels and did no manual blending other than what naturally happens when you layer colors on top of each other on the paper. And these pastels held up to all of those tests. They worked beautifully, and they've actually become one of my go-to pencils to pull from because they sharpen really nicely. I can get really nice points with them. I can layer them up, and they aren't so expensive that I feel like uber precious with them compared to my Caran d'Ache pencils. And we'll touch in on that in a minute. But these pencils have been used on multiple different videos here on my channel. I've used them in other projects, and I have been really impressed with them. I actually wish that they would expand their line because I would love more colors to choose from, especially purples. I feel like that is where they are lacking the most in. It just needed some like darker purples to choose from and like true purples. But everything else with these have been fantastic, and I would really recommend them. The other thing I had an issue with these is they just didn't come with any of their pigment or light fast information. Royal Talens does produce really nice high quality art supplies, so I'm not as worried about them as maybe some other brands you might find online. But I do wish I had better light fast information related to them. That's just something I've noticed with soft pastels in general and pastel pencils is you don't always get really good light fast information. So I wish that was improved with them. But I find most of my critiques and criticisms with this product are more just kind of superficial nitpicky ones because for the most part, I just love them so much that I want more. And so my critiques are, I wish they had more neutrals, or I wish they had more purples or more reds or whatever it is, because I enjoy their formulation and their product so much that I want to use it all the time. And that's a good sign that this product is really nice. I have a lot of different brands of pastel pencils and some that are a lot more money than this that I hardly ever seem to gravitate towards, even though they have beautiful colors, because they are finicky to sharpen, like my Caran d'Ache. I really like my Caran d'Ache pencils. I love the light fast information with them, and I enjoy using them. But some days I'm just not in the mood to deal with how high maintenance they are, because they are a little bit trickier to sharpen. Their leads tend to break easily, and I'm just not in the mood to deal with that. Or other brands that are well known, they tend to be a little bit more scratchy, and I just don't want to deal with that either. And so I find myself grabbing these pencils quite a bit, even though they are a little bit more of a limited color palette. So I'll grab these ones and then just grab a couple colors from other brands to kind of fill in the gaps here. So let's talk about the price, because that is a big factor when we're determining what art supplies to buy. And I don't ever want you guys to feel pressured to buy an art supply. I don't want you guys to ever feel pressured to buy something because it will make you a better artist, because that's not the case. Yes, new art supplies, nicer art supplies can help, but you can make beautiful artwork with just a #2 pencil and a printer paper or some kind of Bic pen. Like you don't need the fancy stuff to be a good artist. But if you are wanting to grow your soft pastel collection, or you're looking for a good quality set to get started, then this is a good starting place. So this set, when I bought it a year ago, I bought it for $83 off of Dick Blick, which made it about $1.73 per pencil. Sadly, with everything going on right now with the tariffs, because these are made in Holland and are imported here into the United States, and all of the other craziness going on in our world, these pencils have gone up quite a bit in price, along with, most other art supplies. So now online, I'm finding these pencils ranging between like $105 and $130 right now. The best deal I found them online was at Dick Blick for about $102.66 for the set of 84 pencils, which makes it about $2.14 per pencil. So a 41-cent increase, which 41 cents doesn't sound like a lot, but when you multiply that across 48 pencils, that adds up pretty quickly. That said, if you are wanting to get some softer pastel pencils and kind of grow your collection, these are a more affordable route to go through than to buy a set of Caran d'Ache pastel pencils, because the Caran d'Ache set of 40 retails for about $173 on Dick Blick. So those cost about $4.30 per pencil. So quite a bit more, and quite a big hit to the wallet. However, if you are wanting to get these open stock, that's where this whole thing changes. These are a great deal for the sets, but when you go into open stock, these jump up quite a bit. So these pencils were averaging about $2.14 per pencil in the complete set. But if you go to buy these pencils open stock, they jump up to $4.70 per pencil in open stock at Dick Blick. So a lot more money per pencil. Whereas the Caran d'Ache pencils go from $4.30 per pencil in their set to $4.74 per pencil in open stock. So there is a bigger jump in terms of cost per pencil if you're buying these Bruynzeel pencils. So if you are thinking of buying these pencils, I would start by maybe just buying 1 or 2 pencils open stock if you're not sure. Test them out, see if you like the texture of them. But then if you want to buy more than that, I would highly recommend just biting the bullet and getting the complete set, because it's a much better deal to buy the set than to buy them in open stock form. And then things like Caran d'Ache pencils, things like that, since it's a smaller margin in the difference of what they cost in a set or in individual form, it might be more worth it to just buy a few individual colors to help fill in the gaps that this set might have in terms of color and value and things like that. So now it's really just up to you to decide whether you think these pencils will be a good fit in your collection and how you work as an artist. But you can see from this demo that I have been able to get really soft blends going on, and I have been able to layer these pastels quite a bit to create new colors. And that is a really good sign of a good pencil, because you can layer these up. They're soft enough that you can layer them up on a paper like this Canson Mi-teintes paper. I did spray it with workable fixative 1 or 2 times throughout this process just to really adhere that pastel down, add a little bit more grit so that I can do a little bit more layering and detailing. But you can see I have layered these pastels quite a bit, and you don't even see a ton of the texture showing through. It's one of the reasons why I don't love working on Canson Mi-teintes paper for my bigger projects, because I don't love that systematic texture that you see throughout the whole piece. It's not something that I particularly enjoy. But what I did like with these pencils was that they blended so nicely and they were soft enough that I could blend these in and layer them so that that texture became a lot less noticeable and it wasn't the first thing you saw. Where other pastel pencils that I've used on this paper, they just weren't soft enough to really deposit a lot of color and pigment down for me to be able to blend and fill in the tooth of the paper as smoothly. And you can see I have done a lot of layering and building the colors and creating new colors that I didn't have in this palette to begin with. And I find that working with a limited palette does help push my creativity in terms of how I layer color, how I use color. I tend to do a lot more like blues and purples in areas that you wouldn't think would have blues and purples. And that is just something that helps you grow as an artist. Because it is tempting to buy all of the colors, whether it's watercolor or pastels, colored pencils. It is really tempting to buy all the colors, and having a lot to choose from can be beneficial, but sometimes it can be overwhelming and kind of stunt our creativity. And I find having some kind of limited palette or limiting myself in some kind of way does help me get more creative with how I utilize my colors, how I look at it, and how I understand value. But even with all of that layering that we did, you can still see I'm able to get these rays of light on top of all of those previous layers. And that is a testament to how soft these pastels are. I know I talked earlier about how pastel pencils have a narrower margin in how soft and how hard they are compared to traditional soft pastels, but there is still a noticeable difference between these and a Pitt pastel pencil. And I love Pitt pastels. They are one of my favorites, and some of the other brands that are on the market. And so it is nice to have a softer type of pastel pencil to do those final layers with. But if you don't have it in the budget to buy a softer pastel pencil, but you do have pastels at home, more traditional pastels, those tend to be softer in general than a pastel pencil. So you can just pull those out and use those for your final mark makings and final details if you find that you can't add any more layers of pastel pencil to your paper, because the pastels are softer and they will deposit color a little bit easier. So just something to keep in mind, and don't feel like you have to buy them if it's not in the budget. You do see this black border on the edge of this painting. Sometimes when I'm working on this paper, I like to add a black border to just kind of streamline it and clean up the edges. I'm not sure if it made it better or not. I was in a moment where I was like, maybe the black border will help it look better. I'm still up for debate whether it did make it look better or not. I probably should have cleaned up the lines of it a little bit more. But I had a newborn at home at this stage when I was painting this a few months ago, and I was on a limited time frame. So I just did the best I could with what I had. But I feel like I was able to really capture this painting and add quite a bit of detail on this paper with these pencils. And I was really impressed, because usually I don't get this kind of detail unless I am working on a sanded paper. So anyways, that is my review of the Bruynzeel, I think that's how it's pronounced, pastel pencil from Royal Talens. Let me know if you have any questions about these. I will do my best to answer them, and be sure to check out my other videos where I demonstrate these pencils, because it will give you a better idea of how wonderful they are. And I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.